I'm JD, and I'm here with another edition of JD Answers All of Your Questions. You see, I believe that every question deserves an answer. And I get kind of annoyed when speakers run out of time during conference sessions or webinars and never get to the Q&A. Plus, when you have an audience of super smart, super engaged people, there's really no way you can get to everyone during like an hour. So whenever I host a larger session, I crowdsource all of the questions digitally, and then I commit to answering every single one right here on my LearnGeek YouTube channel. So today, I'm going to answer questions from my ATD26 session. No desk, no problem. Craft a Right-Fit Frontline Learning Strategy. You see, this session was based on my new book, the Frontline Enablement Playbook, which dropped earlier this month. And it was actually one of the only sessions at ATD26 focused on frontline and deskless workers. At least that wasn't hosted by a software provider. And the room was packed. Online attendees were watching the stream. They were super engaged in the chat. And it was an honor to elevate the frontline conversation during the world's largest talent development conference. So head over to frontlineplaybook.com if you want to check out the book. And now, let's answer your questions. Up first, how do you overcome limitations with device access to help deskless workers find information on the job? Now, when we talk about technology in L&D, we're almost always talking about software. We just kind of assume that screens exist because corporate employees sit at computers all day, every day. And this just isn't the case on the front line. When I was a skipper at the world famous Jungle Cruise, I saw a computer when I clocked in and when I clocked out. And then maybe if I needed to get a new assignment. And that was it. I didn't carry a mobile device while navigating the jungle rivers of the world. And even in spaces where people do have devices in the workflow, that access can be limited by role or by task. So if you visit the grocery store, as an example, stockers might be carrying handhelds because they're scanning products, but people running carts in the parking lot or people that are bagging your purchases, they might never see a device as part of their day. So the hardware challenge is very real on the front line, but there are a few things that you can do to overcome this obstacle and foster a more direct flow of information between the people who know and the people who need on the front line. So first thing you can do, find every access point in your workplace. Where are the computers? Who has a mobile device? What are the rules around personal smartphones? How is connectivity in spaces where the job gets done? Because you have to understand the entire digital landscape before deciding how to adopt a digital approach. Sometimes you might have the ability to move devices that are already there, but get them closer to the flow of work. So for example, my team once moved old PCs out of a training room and then positioned them in various workspaces within a logistics facility to improve digital access. You can also partner with your IT team to find out, how is the company's hardware strategy evolving over the next few years? Where is the company investing in devices? And how can you leverage this strategy to help people perform on the job, even if that's not why your company is investing in hardware, at least not initially? And then there's personal devices. Talking to stakeholders about personal devices today is a wildly different conversation than I was having back in 2019, because more and more organizations are willing to get past their concerns about things like distractions on the job, because they can see how on-demand access to information can have a positive impact on performance and on business outcomes. But that's the key. It's not about making learning more accessible on the job. This is about providing people with the tools they need to execute, to hit your goals, the goals that stakeholders already care about. And when you position your case for CYOD, so choose your own device, not just BYOD, CYOD, maximizing all of the touch points, it's a lot easier to overcome legacy challenges that people might have. Plus, you have to be sure to work with providers who can help you execute a CYOD approach on the front line. And that includes capabilities like potentially restricting certain information access when people are clocked out, or maybe when they're physically not near or in the facility. So to sum up, there are ways to overcome hardware limits, whether it's device availability or a legacy mentality that's in frontline operations today. There are always going to be spaces where mobile devices are just a hard no, like bringing a phone onto the manufacturing line You're just not going to be able to do it. But it does require an understanding of the workflow, the current digital landscape, and your IT roadmap to determine, how can you evolve the relationship that your frontline has with technology on the job. And thanks so much for the first question. Up next, how do you navigate meeting expectations of operations leadership who are, quote, too busy to define, they put the quotes in there, not me, too busy to define their needs to L&D, and where information doesn't filter down from leadership? Ops managers will always be too busy. It's literally their job to solve problems as they appear within an unpredictable operation where, there's a plan, and it goes out the window, like within the first 30 minutes of every shift. So you're not going to get managers to suddenly prioritize L&D. I believe they know learning is important. It's just never going to be as important as hitting their hourly goal or responding to the next email that's coming from corporate. But this isn't really a question about, limited time or shifting priorities, or it's not even about learning at work. This is a question about perspective, about relationships, and about trust. How do operations managers look at you today? What are you to them? And what value do you provide as part of their work? Are you the L&D team that's checking compliance boxes and maybe even adding more work to their already overflowing plate because you need them to chase people down to complete training that they don't understand or potentially value? It's kind of how I saw learning and development when I was an operations manager. Are you a team maybe on the other side that understands the job, understands how the job gets done every day, stays out of the way whenever possible, and then when you are there, when you do show up, you're there to help them solve an important problem that they already prioritize and understand? That's how you overcome the too busy problem. You come at it from a relationship building perspective, and you shift how you're perceived by moving from the service provider to part of the team. Because you are part of the team. It's not the business over there and you over here. We're all part of one team that's trying to solve problems and help people do their best to accomplish their goals. So you got to get into the conversation. You got to make sure you understand the business and its priorities, and you got to talk ops. Don't talk to people about learning. Don't talk L&D. Talk the business. And then you got to find a problem that you can solve that's going to turn some heads. Find champions within the operation who can share your value that you're a problem solver, and then do it again and solve another problem. And pretty quick, in my experience, people are going to start coming to you and looking for help, not looking for learning, looking for help. And then every time you fix something, you're putting a deposit in the relationship bank that you're going to be able to cash in when it's time to ask them for help, ask for their support, because you need to get a required training done, right? Or this is a really important tool or a new resource or a meaningful development opportunity. You're going to be able to capture that time and that buy-in and capture their subject matter expertise when it's time to get an agreement or get information to help inform a solution. And then the other part of the question, filtering information down from senior management to the front line literally never works. It's a game of broken telephone that's not worth playing, because HQ often doesn't understand how the job gets done every day. And frontline managers and frontline employees are going to deprioritize stuff that doesn't make the next shift successful, regardless of what the CEO, CHRO, CLO might say about it. So to move information to the front line, you need channels that reach directly to the people who are doing the work. And in my past, this could have been a dedicated frontline mobile application with communication ability. In some cases, it was a knowledge base that was used every day on the job and gave me that direct connection or touch point. But I also needed champions, again, within the operation who could help me get the message out and influence people to think differently. Because as L&D, we can't do this alone. I have a feeling we're going to talk a lot about mindsets, we're going to talk a lot about relationships, and we're going to talk a lot about time as this video goes on. So hope that was helpful. Thanks so much for the question. And now we're moving on. with no time to lose. There's time. Limited internet or device access. We've touched that. And tightly controlled conditions where every distraction impacts revenue. How do you get support to implement training programs? Okay, so we touched devices. We've talked access. We talked a little bit about time. But again, I don't think this question is really about those things. This is a question of perception. What are you trying to accomplish with your training programs? And why is the company not willing to invest in the tools you need to make it work, in labor hours, in device access, whatever the obstacle may be? Because if L&D is perceived as a distraction from revenue-generating activity, you have a value problem. There's a mismatch in terms of the value proposition in that perception. So even if people are willing to make time for training, are they really there? Right? Are they paying attention? Are they trying to learn? Because learning is a personal decision. It's a process that I control, not something that you can push upon me. Even if you can make me consume content, you can't make me learn. Or are they there in the room, online, but they're just checking the box because they need to get off the naughty list so they can get back to the job they were hired to do? So every solution that you provide for a frontline team has to offer clear, immediate value. Every solution has to respect their time and effort and get straight to the point. And every solution has to be for that audience that's going to use it and offer that clear value to help them do their job better. In my opinion, that's the baseline. But even if you hit those marks, you're still battling legacy, right? People's past experience and perspective of L&D. Me, as an operations manager who saw L&D as a disruption, not a value add, because you pulled people out of my operation, I still had to hit my numbers. There's a good chance that people have wasted time in the past, not with you, not your solutions, in the past, with training that wasn't really useful. So again, I have to recommend you focus on solving one important problem rather than worrying about like broad ideas like learning engagement or programs. Shift people's perspective of what your team does so that when you come asking for time or for labor hours or for resources, they know it's going to be worthwhile because you've helped them solve important problems in the past. So solve one problem and do it again. Solve another problem. Then get people that you've helped to share why working with you is worth the time and the effort. And then again, keep putting deposits in the trust bank as you go. And finally, spend as much time as possible with the people that you support. Do the job alongside them when you can. And make sure people know who you are. That you're a person who's here to help. You're not a corporate function, right? You're not a faceless, nameless entity with a really long, complicated title, like Center of Excellence for Performance Operations and Optimization. I don't know what your function is called. You've done it though, right? You're not called the training team. You have a word or series of words, and that series of words is trying to articulate value. But in a lot of cases, it's disconnecting you from perception and how people do the job every day. So sign things with your names, right? Make sure people know who you are, that you're here to help, and that you value their time, their sweat, and their capability. And I hope that helps. Thanks so much for your question. And now we're going to talk about how do you train a workforce that desperately requests training but doesn't make time for it, or a workforce that can't step away from working hours for training. Here is the time question. Number one obstacle for developing frontline capability is time. And it's why you need to think about development in terms of minutes, not courses, because that's what you have to work with in a deskless operation. So take you back to the time where I managed L&D in a contact center. And I had to abide by rule number one of a contact center. Don't take people off the phone, because that's where the job gets done. And that meant, in a lot of cases, I had seconds to play with between phone calls if I wanted to help people get better at doing the job. So you have to make training easy in these cases, not simple. Easy to find, easy to access, easy to engage with, easy to understand, easy to apply. And you need to consider all of your options when it comes to fostering development, because courses or online programs, they might just not fit your workflow maybe not on a regular basis, once in a while, but not as the default solution, no matter how effective you think that solution might be. Because on the front line, you don't need the perfect solution. You need the right solution. Hence the title of the session being Right Fit. And that solution, it might be a series of 3-minute videos talking about how to handle a particular piece of a complex work process, or a particular idea or concept or feature of a new product, or a particular part of a more advanced skill set. Or it might be a series of huddle conversations, sharing stories and examples of how people solve these challenging problems. It might be a set of laminated job aids that are hanging on a ring by a workstation, or a QR code that's attached to a piece of equipment that launches a troubleshooting video. We have to bend to the reality of frontline work, because they're not going to change how the job gets done to suit us. So get close to the workflow, ask people who do the job what might be helpful, and then earn every second of time and attention that you get by delivering solutions that are clear, focused, high value. And then you're going to build the business case with these solutions to earn more time, more labor hours, more resources, so that you can support more complex activities. That's where robust programs or apprenticeships or professional development offerings are going to fit into the puzzle. And the last thing I'll say on this topic is do not do lunch and learns or pre-shift or post-shift activities as your development offerings, trying to get around the challenge of time and priorities, because that's people's personal time. That should be their own. No one should ever do a lunch and learn, because if you have to rely on learning during lunch periods that people should be using to pause, relax, reflect, engage, and relate to one another, something is broken in terms of, again, the organization's willingness to invest in people's support and people's development. So don't do those things. Do the other stuff. Thanks for the question. And now, how would you design a training program in today's environment when you have 5 generations of learners who all lead differently, and turnover is 150%, which is on par with the industry? I will forgive you for making me say the word learner. Anyone who's ever met me knows I'm not a big fan, and I think language is indicative of how we engage with the people around us and the organization. So tip number 1. I hate when people say that, like pro tip, right? Didn't do that. I have a suggestion. Please just stop using the word learner. We don't need it. Just refer to people with whatever term you use in your workplace. If they're team members, they're team members. They're partners, cast members, employees, people. We have words already. We don't need our own. Separates us. And then my question related to this question is, what is the training program about? Right? What problem are you trying to solve? Because we can't apply cookie cutter tactics within a workplace that's as complex and as unpredictable as the one that you mentioned. And this is why I talk about systems in this session and in my book, rather than talking about programs, because we need to shape the support operating system around the reality of how the job gets done and the reality of the people that are doing the job. Because everyone should access information in the same way. They should have the same opportunities to share feedback and share their experience. They should understand what development opportunities exist, how they can practice applying things that they learned, how they get feedback on their performance. So there's consistency in the system. And the corporate team can shape the system, right? The tools, the technologies that we make available on the front line. But it's going to be the frontline team that ultimately shapes culture. What's important, what's not, how people spend their time, who does what work, all of those types of things. And the truth is, you're probably never going to meet most of the people you support. And you can't be present in every location on every shift. So you're going to need the people who are physically there supporting the people doing the job to overcome the complexity of frontline work in service of improving performance. So L&D can architect the system in collaboration with our partners in the corporate team. But we need to use that system to enable managers and to enable trainers on site, because those people know the people. They know what works in their site, and they know how to get the job done here. So don't try to find a solution that fits every person or every person every time, because it doesn't exist. Instead, invest in managers. Work with ops to clarify expectations, and then give managers the tools to support their teams every day and help them be successful in their performance. That's how you fix or overcome that challenge? And thanks for your question. Now over to, how can L&D leaders with no field experience gain trust with and knowledge from frontline leaders? Get field experience. Now, there are a lot of jobs that you can learn how to do yourself. So if you work in hospitality, you can learn how to flip rooms with housekeeping, or you can work the front desk, or you can serve in the restaurant. When I was in frontline L&D and frontline management, I regularly put the costume back on when I worked in a movie theater or worked in different locations in theme parks. So I could feel the friction myself, and I could build trust with the teams that I was supporting. But there are also jobs you can't and should not do. Don't try to fly the plane. Don't try to fix the electrical. Don't try to place a central line, right? You have highly trained, highly skilled, highly educated people who are doing those things. But you can still be there when they do the work. You can go to the meetings. You can do your homework on how the operation functions. You can learn the metrics, the language, the processes. You can talk to people who do these jobs and find out what it's like to work in these spaces every day, and then leverage that understanding to inform how you help them do the job better. And that understanding will shine through because you'll respect their reality in the way that you provide support, even if you haven't done the job. So commit to spending time at least once per quarter, hopefully more, within the frontline operation, learning from the people who do the work, because it's the best way to ensure that your strategy fits frontline reality while also helping you build empathy for the people that we rely on to do these jobs every day. Thanks so much for your question. Now we're headed to, what do you do when you have a solid training program for new hires, but then employees get thrown into the, quote, old guard who don't follow the new procedures and supervisors who don't enforce them? My question back is, why don't they do it the way that you train it? You know, what else aren't people doing that's spelled out nicely in like the guidelines and the SOP? And the big question, why does your culture lack accountability? Because that's a way bigger problem than people not following the training program, right? You have a management issue because there's a good chance your company is prioritizing results over the process. And that's a really easy way to make mistakes, to get fined, and even worse, to maybe get someone hurt on the job. And in the new book, I share a story about one particular team I worked with in theme parks. And we were really good at what we did. But we also had this unique culture that fostered a real sense of connection and belonging that carries on to this day. And it's been 15 plus years since I worked with that team. But the culture wasn't magic. The culture, when I reflect back on it, it was built on accountability. And it wasn't accountability from management. It was from our peers. Because let's say I messed up. I knew I was going to hear about it, but I was going to hear about it from my trainer and possibly my trainer's trainer, because I represented their hard work. So I had to be as good as them because that's what we expected of one another. So we have to deal with this idea of accountability as part of the solution. And instead of talking about managers, I would actually, when it comes to training programs and performance, I'd start with your trainers. You know, who's part of the training program for new hires? How do you enable them? How do you hold them accountable for outcomes? And how do you ensure the trainee understands what they should expect so they can also hold their trainer accountable? Because I find that too often we kind of leave trainers on their own, right? We designate people, we promote people, and then they kind of revert back to how they learned how to do something or how they prefer to share information. And then rather than focus on the employee or their performance, we need to focus on the trainers and bring them into the mix and hold them accountable for how the people that they support perform. Because, you know, if their trainees turn over a lot, or their trainees are commonly making mistakes, or their trainees are found to constantly be taking shortcuts, we can start to build that line of accountability that I experienced in some of my most effective frontline teams. So that's how you foster a culture of accountability. That starts with your biggest workplace influencers, rather than focusing on how an individual program is executed, because it's a bigger question that you're asking in this case. And hopefully that helps you address the bigger challenge. Now, speaking of managers, when you say connect managers with experienced peers, are you thinking more along the lines of mentorship? Yes and no. So during the session, I emphasized the fact that, controversial statement, traditional leadership development fails frontline managers because most people simply don't have the time to attend classes, online or in person. Plus, most frontline managers are promoted without a lot of warning because they're just kind of thrown into the job to close an operational gap. And about 41% of frontline managers second guess the decision to take the job. And half of frontline managers are burned out on a daily basis. So we need to rebuild manager enablement to fit the reality of the job. Because again, they're not coming to us. We have to go to them. And the most impactful thing I believe we can do with the limited time and resources available is connect managers with other managers. Just make it easy for people to find their peer group, people who have been through it before, that they can rely on for help, and most importantly, rely on without worrying about politics. Because that often happens when it comes to like, oh, ask your boss, right? And it could be easy, right? Simple ways, like give a list to managers to say, if you have a question about this topic, here's a good person to contact. Or you can have a dedicated chat group or a dedicated Microsoft Teams channel. Maybe it's by region, maybe it's by different topics of interest or challenges, right? Just make it easy to find one another. Because being a frontline manager can be an isolating experience. It can be a lonely experience. Imagine you have stores all over the country, but where's the closest location to yours? Could be in another town, could be in another state, could be in another country. So make it easy for people to connect. And you could have maybe a more formalized mentorship program that connects experienced managers who have stories and experiences to share with people who are less experienced. But sometimes getting mentorship right requires time and effort and investment. And it's something that is covered in the book. So Matthew Daniel covers mentorship in a lot of detail in part 5. So you should definitely check that out if you're interested. So focus on connection when it comes to enabling the managers and make it easy for people to find their people. And then get out of the way, because it doesn't have to be a formal engagement, at least not to get started. So thanks for your question. 2 more to go. When reflecting on varied and unique backgrounds, should distinct motivations be made more explicit? So I'm not sure how to tackle this question. So I'm going to vamp for a bit, and hopefully this is useful. So during the session and in the book, I talk about the idea that the frontline workforce isn't one thing, right? It's a lot of different people with different motivations, different backgrounds, different experiences, working in different environments, doing different kinds of work. But people who do all of this work share a lot of common attributes: limited time, limited autonomy, varied technology access, things like that I break down in the story. And one of those shared attributes is the fact that everyone brings different motivations to the job. Because some people are open to building a career in the industry, in your business. Most people, I find, are there for the paycheck, right? They have someone to take care of, or at least to start. That's why they took this job. And you kind of have to think about the math of things, right? You might have, let's say, 5,000 frontline team members. How many corporate jobs do you have, right? How many ladders are there to climb? There might be maybe a few hundred, if that. So the math just doesn't math when it comes to kind of a traditional career development approach in a lot of frontline operations. But still, everyone, regardless of why they're with you, deserves a chance to do their best work every shift, right? Everyone should have the opportunity to understand what development exists, right? What the path could be, where the ladders are in the organization, and what it takes to pursue those opportunities. It shouldn't be a guessing game. And corporate teams need to make these realities easier for every frontline worker, regardless of why they're there. And then it's location managers that can get to know and should get to know and should be required to get to know the team members. You know, why are you here? What do you hope to accomplish? How can I help make that happen? Because again, I'm the person that you work with. Frontline employees don't work for the company. They work for their manager, person who knows their name, hires them, trains them, coaches them, pays them, schedules them, all of those types of things. So, you know, as the manager, I might spend time getting to know somebody and then understand, oh, the way I can help you is I can help manage your schedule because you're balancing 2 jobs, you're balancing childcare. That's how I can make this experience more beneficial to you. Or you might be someone who is interested in development opportunity. I can point you in the right direction, show you what opportunities exist. So maybe you want to be a manager too someday. And these motivations potentially are going to change over time, right? So managers need the time and they need the training to be able to build these relationships, maintain the relationships, focus on their people, not just be buried in administrative work, because that's what burns them out on a regular basis. So yes, we should understand that people's individual motivations, but we need to understand them as much as people are willing to share. Because some people may be willing to have that conversation. Maybe people have to kind of feel it out, get to know people, get to know the company, and kind of determine what's my path forward here? What am I interested in doing? But that needs to happen at the local level because there's only so much that headquarters can do to adapt a system to fit individual wants and individual needs, because you're supporting a lot of people who are bringing a lot to the table. You also have a lot of managers, a lot of leaders out there that can help bridge that gap for folks. Thanks for your question. And finally, what digital reinforcement options can support frontline workers when mobile pushes are prohibited? Now, here's the thing. Reinforcement's not inherently a digital concept, just like training isn't a digital concept, especially on the front line. There's, at some point, I think in L&D, we just kind of veered in the direction of, oh, training equals digital, because again, corporate employees are sitting in front of screens. It's the way we commonly reach people. And corporate employees, you have 500 corporate team members. They might do 473 different jobs. So it's really hard to connect people with shared needs or shared experiences. The frontline is the opposite. You have 10,000 employees doing 14 different jobs. So the scale is different. The way we can engage is different. And again, the relationship to technology is different. So the question becomes, when it comes around to reinforcement, what do people need to remember? Right? What do they need to be ready to do, especially things that they might not do on a regular basis? Or what are the important corner cases or the important emergency procedures? And then how can you offer regular practice opportunity to make sure people are ready, they feel confident? It's not just they know, it's that they know, right? They're capable and confident, so they're prepared to do it, to execute, solve the problem in the moment of need. So here are a few different reinforcement tactics I've applied over the years, all of which have nothing to do with technology. First one's really easy. Just asking people questions. Right? Ask a scenario-based question and challenge someone to say, well, how would you handle this situation? And this is something that when I was a theme park manager, I was required to do. So the administrator for the area would give me a card for each shift. And I would take this index card out into the operation, and I had to ask the question on the card of a certain number of people. And then I would note the responses on the card, note if I had to provide coaching because they didn't get the question correct, or maybe they didn't answer fast enough because it's an important question. What would you do in the situation? And I would take the card, fill it out, and then hand it back to the administrator, and they're tracking this information. This was an ops initiative, wasn't a learning and development thing. Part of my job as a manager. And as an example, the most popular question I had to ask was, what would you do if you heard an unusual noise? The correct answer is stop the ride. Or you're going to hit the really large red button and then ask questions or call maintenance or call for management. So I ask that question over and over and over again, not just of everybody once, of the same people over and over and over again on a cycle. So then I could trust that the team members were ready to respond if that situation were to happen. So questions. Number 2, the pre-shift huddle. This is a great channel that you can leverage to reinforce critical information. But instead of making the huddle like an information delivery flood, right, where you're shoving lots of information at the managers, who are then shoving lots of information at the employees because they're taking all the emails they get, they print them out and they read them, and then they highlight things and they post them in the break room. You've seen it, right? So instead of that, help managers be capable of telling stories, sharing examples, right, offering challenging scenarios where the team can collaborate. And what would we do? How would we solve this problem? And use that questioning to, again, challenge people to share their field tested practices. Because it may be the types of questions or the types of scenarios where there's not one answer, right? Stop the ride, one answer. But how are you helping people overcome this customer service situation? And it's a great chance for people to highlight what they're seeing out in the operation, how they're tackling these challenges, and to give people new ideas and validate those ideas through the manager who's right there. Because huddles are a critical part of frontline enablement. But I find we rarely teach managers how to lead an effective version of this kind of meeting to drive the positive outcomes they can get. And again, not just make it about telling people stuff. It's about engaging people. And then another one is auditing. So going back to the theme parks, a lot of theme park examples today. We had in one location, we had a peer auditing team. So once per month, we would schedule a trainer out of the operation to complete an audit shift. So they came to work, wore plain clothes, and then they just repeatedly experienced the location as a guest. And they took notes on people's performance. And in some cases, they pulled people aside for coaching sessions. And it required minimal investment in labor hours. That's one shift per month. And it resulted in clear performance improvements because the peer trainer was able to reinforce the right behaviors. And they could do it without the baggage that's sometimes carried by managers when they have that conversation. It's not a disciplinary thing, right? It's a peer-to-peer accountability thing, which is what we talked about earlier in the video. So, if you can leverage technology to offer practice activities, scenarios, coaching, role plays, simulations, all the different things we can now do with AI, that's an awesome part of the story. But you should still, even if you have technology and you can nudge people in the right direction, still leverage the analog tactics that we've talked about, because that's how you're going to ensure, as part of your overall enablement strategy, that people are ready to make the right decisions when it matters most for them, for their team members, for your customers, and for your business. So thanks so much for the question. And that's a wrap on our ATD26 Q&A. So thank you to everyone who attended my sessions at the event, everyone who supported the Every Shift Counts initiative to help elevate the frontline and the people who support them every day. And you can learn more at everyshiftcounts.com. And remember, check out the Frontline Enablement Playbook at frontlineplaybook.com. And until next time, thank you for everything that you do. Let's connect on LinkedIn and continue this conversation. And of course, let me know how I can help you enable your frontline team. So feel free to reach out anytime at jddillon.com. Thanks so much. See you next time. Be well.